My sister-in-law teaches elementary school, and one of the most hope-inspiring things I've ever heard is an anecdote she shared with me that when she talks to her young students about things like the civil rights movement, it absolutely blows their mind that anyone had ever been dumb enough to judge the value of a human being by something as insignificant as the amount of melanin in one's skin. But before they can learn about the civil rights movement, they have to be convinced that the kind of horrific racial discrimination that we've seen in past decades, and the echoes and shadows of that are still cast in some people's lives in some places today, they have to be convinced that that's real, because that seems absurd to them, and that gives me a lot of hope. And the reason I bring that up is because as we talk about the different causes that are championed by progressive reformers and by the progressive journalists that serve as the engine of the progressive movement, some of them from our 21st century perspective might seem just such common sense. Why were these things ever controversial? While on the other hand, some of the causes may seem in hindsight a little ridiculous, and while others of them will seem downright wrong-headed. So we've got movements to curb the power of special interest in politics and reform the democratic process in state and local laws. Others are seeking safe working conditions for factory workers. It's one of those that may strike us as, why was that ever controversial? Different groups prioritized banning the sale of alcohol, and that may cause some of us to raise our eyebrows and that seems like a curbing of freedoms in some regard. And I say that without any endorsement of alcohol, which is not a part of my life, and I wouldn't recommend to any. What unites these progressive reformers, despite their different background and their different causes, and this is coming straight from OpenStax, was a set of uniting principles. Most strove for a perfection of democracy. I love that phrase, a perfection of democracy. What's democracy? Democracy is the rule of the people. The rule of the people can't be perfected until the people are perfected. Now you might think, well, we are human beings and not angels or gods or anything like that, so perfection is not a possibility, and I'd say you're right. But perfection as a goal, if we strive to be perfect, we will always be actively attempting to better ourselves according to our own judgment of what it means to be better. It's hard to think of a more noble goal than that. Of course, people's opinions of what makes for betterment are going to vary, but the notion that I reflected on this a bit in the last lesson, the notion that we should look at ourselves in the mirror and not just pat ourselves on the back as the greatest people of all time because we happen to be born in a certain zip code in a certain hemisphere, but ask ourselves how we should be better is the most healthy element that I can identify in American culture. So most strive for this perfection of democracy, which required the expansion of suffrage. Suffrage is, if you're thinking suffrage means suffering, and oh my goodness, the expansion of suffering, how awful. No, suffrage is voting rights. And so they want to expand suffrage to worthy citizens. That sounds nice, and that will include expanding suffrage to women. But everything that's nice also has a shadow side. Who's to say who are worthy citizens? And some of the same voices that are seeking to expand voting rights to the worthy are also seeking to restrict political politicians for those considered unfit on account of health, education, or that can't be right. Race? The progressives are seeking to limit political participation on account of race? Yeah, life is complicated. Life is messy. A running theme in this course. Progressives also agreed that democracy had to be balanced with an emphasis on efficiency, a reliance on science and technology, and a deference to the expertise of professionals. What does that mean? It means that perhaps we should listen to people who know what they're talking about. Why was that ever controversial? At the same time, they repudiated party politics, because recall, the parties at the time were really just interested in winning. It was our team versus their team, not our ideals versus their ideals. And they saw themselves as agents of social justice and reform, as well as stewards and guides of workers in the urban poor. That's very nice, except, shadow side, when I see myself as the agent of justice, I might tend to confuse justice with whatever I feel is right at the moment, and start viewing with contempt the very people I'm seeking to help. And look, often reformers' convictions and faith in their own expertise led them to dismiss the voices of the very people they sought to help. So let's take a look at the progressives' role to expand democracy, to give more people access to the levers of government, and to make the rule of the people something closer to the rule of the actual people and not the rule of the elite and the wealthy among the people. The first law that is enacted by the influence of the progressive reformers is the creation of a direct primary. Before this, political candidates were chosen by delegates at conventions. Delegates are chosen because of their proven loyalty to a party, and delegates are people who are already people of influence, whereas the common folk, you and I, in our homes, just eating our cans of beans and clipping our toenails and whatever people do in their homes. Yes, the secret is out. I do eat beans. I do clip my toenails. The common people are often left out of that process. Direct primaries begin to be adopted by the states, and in primary elections, we the people ourselves vote on who will be nominated to be the ultimate candidates to be chosen in the general election. South Carolina adopted this system for statewide elections in 1896. In 1901, Florida, our very own Florida, became the first state to use the direct primary in nominations for the presidency, and it's the method currently used in 3/4 of U.S. states. Another series of reforms pushed forward by the progressives, seeking to push the power of special interest groups in state legislatures aside and give we the people more of a voice, were 3 innovations in elections: the initiative, the referendum, and the recall. When initiatives, referendums, and recalls are adopted, now they allow people to introduce potential legislation rather than that simply being the domain of the elected representatives. In referendums, people actually vote. So rather than leaving it to the referendums, or leaving it to the legislators, in a referendum we have direct democracy, more on the model of the ancient Athenian democracy in Greece, where when a referendum is called, we, the people, all vote, or at least have the opportunity to vote on whether a law will be passed or whether an existing law will be kept. In a recall election, If people become dissatisfied with a state official, such as a governor, even in the middle of the term, if enough people sign the petition, we can hold a recall election and determine whether to remove the governor or other elected official from office, a decision otherwise left to the legislature in the impeachment process. By 1920, 12 states had adopted the recall as a tool. It's only been used a few times, to remove the governor of North Dakota in 1921, and more recently, in 2003, to remove the governor of California. In an effort to achieve a fairer representation of state constituencies in the U.S. Congress, Progressive lobbied for the approval of the 17th Amendment to the Constitution, which mandated the direct election of United States senators. Prior to that, senators were appointed by the state governments rather than elected by the people. The 17th Amendment put an end to that nonsense. Progressives are also interested in making cities run more smoothly, more efficiently, and less corruptly. Progressives in large cities were really frustrated. Remember the machine politics from our recent lessons, which, although could be effective to get each interest group what they wanted, were massively corrupt and massively undemocratic, and ended up wasting enormous sums of taxpayer money. So the progressives start looking to reform city government. One thing that gave them the opportunity to do this was a devastating tragedy in the city of Galveston, Texas. Galveston, Texas was struck by a hurricane in 1901, which is the worst natural disaster in United States history in terms of loss of life. And the next video in the playlist will tell you a little bit more about the terrible Galveston